Hello, I'm Emma-Louise Coffey and you're welcome to the Dairy Edge, the Teagasc Dairy podcast. We're bringing you the latest information, insights and opinion to improve dairy farm performance. On this week's episode, notwithstanding the high milk price, dairy advisor Adrian O'Callaghan and farmer Diarmuid Hegarty join us to debate potential savings to feed reserves by identifying and removing marginal cows from the system in this high cost year. And I first asked Diarmuid what stocking rate and feed demand he is running at currently.
I'm farming here with my family, Catherine, my wife, and our 6 children. We're farming in Vickerstown, and look, we're milking around the 200 cows. We were crossbreeding a few years ago. There's a maintenance of €25 on the herd, and maybe we might be drifting back to keep it around €20. The overall milking platform stocking rate, it's actually similar to the whole stocking rate. We rear our young stock as well, and it's around the 2.5. But there's a complication in that, in the sense that we graze the silage ground on the shoulders, but there's a bit of road work involved in that. So during the main season, we'd be stocked at 4 or 4.5. And kind of road that would exclude road work, which we kind of try to keep it simple from April to August or so, like that. So that's our system as of the moment.
And from a practical feed allocation, Diarmuid, like what is your annual feed budget that you have in mind per cow? Like you mentioned a maintenance of €25, so you're kind of maybe in and around the 490-500 kilos in terms of live weight. What is the allowance of feed for those animals, and maybe a breakdown across the different feed products?
Well, we weigh the cows every June/July, and third lactation plus, like similar to your figures, would be 530 for the crossbreds, 550 for the black and whites. So when you include first and second lactation, it correlates quite closely to the maintenance figures. Look, on our feed budgets, we're running the farm for the last few years at this stocking rate. We're in around the 700 kgs fresh weight of concentrate. About a tonne dry matter of silage should, keep them going, and the balanced in with grazed grass. And I suppose the other thing is the cows and young stock, we're talking about the cows, they can graze all of that ground. So like, we're not zero grazing in, we're only feeding silage when they're dry as such, or maybe small bit in the spring, small bit in the autumn. But typically, even in the autumn, they're grazing day and night. When we hit our target cover, they come in. When they calve, weather permitting, they're out day and night as well. So it's just a dry cow is getting, I'd say, 90% of the. So they're getting probably 100 kgs of dry matter and silage as a milking cow, and probably 900 kgs as a dry cow. So that's kind of our figures. As I say, now we are running it for the last few years, so we're confident enough. Look, we can grow. We'll be measuring grass. Look, John Maher has been out here, I'd say, give you a course 20 years ago. So like we're fairly confident in the figures and fairly confident in what the farm can produce.
And that stocking rate of 4 to 4.5 across the mid-season, as you mentioned, it's replicated across a number of years, so you're quite comfortable with it. But, what sort of demand have you to maintain in terms of matching that with growth during the main grazing season?
A demand of 80. And look, I wouldn't be quite rigid on the meal feeding. If we're a bit tight, I've no problem upping the meal to save a bit of work going on the road. But if we have to go on the road during the main season, we do for aftergrass and stuff like that. We're prepared to do that as well. So look, there is a bit of flexibility. It's 4.5, but to be fair to, I suppose, I have the safety valve of extra ground if I'm prepared to go to it, and of increasing the meal. But as of the moment, we're running at about 80 of a demand.
And that number you talk about, the 200 cow mark, is the numbers that you're running, Diarmuid. Are you looking to maintain cow numbers this year, or, have you changed things given the increased input prices? Is that something you're addressing?
My original intention, I suppose, maybe 6 months ago was to maybe milk 20 cows or 10 to 20 cows more. But then I suppose in practice, that would mean the more marginal cows that you'll be keeping, and those marginal cows will be making you work harder because, look, like that now, it will either increase the demand here or else you'll be a bit more time on the road, and to just complicate the system. So, like, we had dried off cows with the intention of calve and culling, and then look, as the spring progressed, I suppose I played catch up, that maybe cows I should have culled last year or maybe the year before. We were probably more disciplined this spring, and we were more critical in regarding to what's worth staying around and what's worth culling.
And to you, Adrian, I guess listening to what Diarmuid's saying, and I guess your vast knowledge of farms based on the discussion groups you work with, are you seeing something similar that Diarmuid is talking about, that discipline this year to put the spotlight on each cow and consider, is she a cow to keep or is she a marginal cow to the system?
So, Emma-Louise, yeah, I suppose Diarmuid is in one of my 6 discussion groups, and I suppose we put an emphasis on this when we were doing the profit monitor in January. And just to kind of give maybe a small little overview there, like when we did the figures, the variable and fixed costs per cow were coming out at €1,840, and that was based on the group basically doing about 519 kgs of milk solids at 3.7 protein and 4.3 fat, and so at a payout of €5 a kg of milk solids. Like, so I suppose when we did the sum on it, then, like, to look at the whole break even milk solids, and the group were anxious to do that. Like, when you divide that €1,800 and €1,840 per cow by €5, it was 368 kgs of milk solids. And I suppose really, like, at that stage, we were working at €5 a kg, and we were kind of knowing what was coming down the road with fertilizer prices and energy prices. I suppose the focus then came on these marginal cows, and like that they were really only a break-even exercise in 2022. And were the members of the group willing to hold them and to just break even on them and make no money and maybe put the rest of the system under pressure? And like, even going forward, last month we readdressed it and looked at it, and when you at that stage in January, like, the answer was there were going to be an issue, and they had to be looked at, and they were going to put pressure on the system, especially the high stocking rate. Now that we knew that the milk price was going to rise maybe from €5 to €6 a kg of milk solids, but the costs had risen as well. Like, and sure, it's well known, like, fertilizer up 250% and feed up €100 a tonne. And so overall, like, the increase in the costs and energy costs, fixed costs are probably up €68 a cow, as I say. So the total cost increase is probably going to be in the region of €540 a cow. So add that on to our 1,840, you're coming in at somewhere around 2,400. But because of the payout at €6, the break-even milk solids isn't all that different. It's somewhere in the region of 390 kgs. So, like, I suppose the decision last month was still to move a number of cows on, because I suppose in the general farming scene, I suppose it's seen as, with the good milk price, that these cows should be kept, that they're going to leave a return. But when you do the sums on it, they're still not going to leave no more of a return than what they were going to do in January at a lower milk price. So I suppose the issue then is to identify these cows in the herd, and identify what effect they'll have on the feed budget, as you mentioned to Diarmuid earlier on, like, you know.
And it's interesting you say that, Adrian, because you've given us a whole lot of figures, and I think you've articulated it well when you would have completed profit monitor meetings in January. You know, costs we're looking at somewhere in the region of €1,840, and that has increased dramatically. And, you know, you've documented the various specific costs that are really adding to that. And I suppose also the base that you're talking about with the farmers you're dealing with, 519 kilograms of milk solids. So really high performers, but I guess we're not all in that situation, and some of us are maybe closer to the 400 mark. And I suppose this is particularly important for a farmer in those shoes. I suppose to you, Diarmuid, you know, based on Adrian's comment, you would have been in the discussion group conversations where you talk about these high costs, marginal cows, but also a really attractive milk price right now. You know, those cows that you decided to, you know, maybe not retain at the outset of the lactation, how did you dampen down the temptation with the high milk price?
I suppose you just have to remind yourself that, well, to be fair, the cows now, look, in practice now, the cows, I suppose, that we had in mind, look, they would remind you sometimes why they're on that marginal list. Look, there might be lameness, and look, there might be mastitis. To be fair, we've 3 milk recordings done this spring, so it might be cell count. So, and as well with the milk recording, look, I was even looking at it there, you know, you're looking at cows there that obviously giving the first lactation animals a year's grace because you can't judge them. But like, look, we've arranged there, we have a few ladies there that are hovering over the 400 kgs milk solids predicted for this year. And, you know, you really would be looking hard at them. You'll be certainly questioning whether they're worth putting in calf. And or else, you know, you'd be looking, why is she only doing that? And maybe she's not the stock to have around. Like, the other point about it as well is those cows, look, we have to realize that, I suppose, young stock aren't making a premium at the moment. So the gap between young stock and those marginal cows is, you know, and cull cow price is quite strong. So it's not very tempting this year, even with the milk price. You might get it, they might make as much of a margin by selling him as a cull cow as, or maybe more, then keep you on for the rest of the year, I suppose. So it's not that tempting. I'm finding it not that tempting.
And back to you, Adrian, you know, in terms of feed supply and creating the feed budget, if we reflect on the first 4 months of the year, you know, where do you see grass growth, say, within your local area so far in 2022, if we compare it with the same 4 months in 2021?
Yeah, look, Emma-Louise, it's not altogether different. When I went back and looked at the figures, roughly this time last year we had 1.8 tonne of grass grown, and when I looked at it there the other day, we're 1.67 tonne of grass grown. So look, we're marginally back 120 kgs of dry matter per hectare. But I suppose when you look at the fertilizer that has been spread, it's definitely back. Like, I would say that most people are probably back 30 units on what they would have spread the year before. They definitely have missed maybe the first round, the half a bag urea, and some of the fertilizer has been replaced with slurry. So overall, I would say it's surprising enough the grass growth is just marginally back, for definitely a reduction in inputs of fertilizer.
And on that, and I suppose to take it a step further, for somebody in Adrian's shoes who has decided not to keep those 10 or 20 cows, so that would essentially make up 10% more cows in his herd. I suppose, could you quantify or explain to us how we would go about quantifying that for our own herd, Adrian? You know, if we made the decision to cull a cow in the spring, or maybe now into mid-season, you know, compared with the standard culling procedure that happens on farms once cows are scanned in August or September.
Yeah, so like when we looked at it, there is a saving roughly of culling a cow in April to the effect of roughly 25 tonne fresh weight of silage saved for the winter. And I suppose just to explain that figure, it's twofold in effect. If I sell a cow now in April, she's not going to eat grass for the rest of the year because she's been removed from the farm. So that extra grass can be saved, conserved as silage, and then as you move into the winter, that cow isn't present again to eat silage. So that's, I suppose, it's a twofold effect where that 25 tonne of fresh weight of silage comes from. Compare it to the normal, I suppose, practice of selling the cows in September, you've only half that effect. So it's roughly a saving of 12.5 tonne of silage. And again, it's because it's half because the cow is going to be there for the year and consuming grass, so you don't get to make that grass into silage. You just save the silage she's going to eat for the winter. So in effect, that's the saving. And I suppose the other side of it is when the dairy specialists within Teagasc here looked at the profit monitors completed, and there was 730 odd profit monitors in the mix when they looked at the figures for the amount of forage that I suppose people are buying in from outside. And roughly 30, somewhere between 25 and 30% we're actually buying in the equivalent of 2 bales per cow or a half a tonne of dry matter of the 25% of the 730 odd people. And really, I suppose that's where we're coming back to. If you're in a situation where you are buying silage on the stem, or you're buying silage from outside land that you have control of, like in effect, then every one cow that you might decide is marginal at this stage, and you sell her, you're now saving 25 tonne of silage, and in effect that is going to feed for other cows, right through the year and into the winter. So I suppose really people that are buying silage from an outside source, they have a number of things they need to do. They need to see that source is still available, and that if it's not available, then maybe culling, and we're not talking about a big number here now. Like five cows less in a herd is going to have a saving of roughly 125 tonne of silage. Like so, and that 125 tonne will feed a lot of animals or replace a lot of silage that was being bought in from an outside source. So I suppose that's what we're getting, and not for people to take the wrong idea that we're taking a big cull of animals. We're identifying a small number of animals that will give a big saving on fodder in a fodder budget at the end of the year.
And I guess, Adrian, it's interesting what you say, because I guess really if you're identifying a problem cow, as Diarmuid says, maybe a lame cow, a cow with consistently high cell count out of the system, and you're reducing your reliance on that bought-in feed, you're actually potentially making a more, I suppose, self-contained, sustainable system, by accident. Another thing, Adrian, Diarmuid mentioned that there is flexibility in his system, that, if there is a situation that there is a tight week in terms of growth versus demand, he can up the concentrate. You have alluded to the fact that farmers have reduced the amount of nitrogen they've spread so far. Do you also see the same trend in terms of concentrate given the rise in pricing?
Yeah, it's just had a group there this morning, Emma-Louise, and it was a topic that was discussed for a good 20 minutes, half an hour, feeding rates. And definitely you can see that maybe lads have come back. Maybe they're probably back a kg or 1.5 kgs on the previous year. And I suppose the point I was trying to make to the lads this morning was, like, you really need to consider the response rates to the concentrate that's being fed. Like that, now that concentrate is probably in the region of 400 to 450 euros. a tonne, and like if you're only getting a response rate of 0.6 to 0.8 of a litre for every kg that you feed, you're in a negative situation. Whereas if you're getting somewhere in the region of a 1-to-1 response, 1 litre for every 1 kg, it's probably just break even. Like, so really, I think people have to probably look at their grass supply currently, now that we're into the middle of the second, heading for the third rotation, and like look at the grazing targets, and the 160 to 180 cover per cow. Look at your demand figure, look at your growth figure, and then seriously ask yourself, like, do I need that extra 1 or 2 kgs? Withstanding that we still have to cover for CalMag and minerals and that, but like if you're stocked at 4 cows to the hectare and you have a demand of 60, every one kg you take out, you're only increase your demand by 4. So like really moving from 60 to 64 or 64 to 68 for every kg you take out won't have a massive effect on your overall grass supply, because like we'd expect this week we're probably growing in the 70s, like, you know. So I suppose we really have to go back to grazing principles, and to look at ways of like feeding this extra concentrate. Is it leaving extra profit at the price at the moment, even though milk price is good? Ration is dear, like, you know, so we need to bear that in mind.
Absolutely, it is an interesting consideration, and it's great to get the experience of the group that you talk about from this morning. And I guess another impact on the supply of grass would be where, you know, you talk about those maybe 5 cows that are going to fall out of the system. That grass is there for grazing too, and that is going to increase the supply that you have for grazing cows, as well as grass that's going to be available for silage conservation. Outside of I guess the feed savings, Adrian, like, are there other benefits if you identify those, for example, 5 marginal cows and remove them from the system?
Well, I suppose the obvious one is the workload. I suppose, in effect, like, people are working with cows every day, so there's that effect. We've said the silage effect, the saving. You know, I suppose the poor performers, like, we've said many a time, the high cell count cows and the spread of infection through the herd. So like all these have a kind of a side effect, even late calvers and getting them back in calf. All these bring extra workload on the system, which, like, them 5 cows probably in effect won't even get missed, because them last 5 cows in effect, when you look at the growing capacity of any farm, if you're growing 12, 13, 14 tonne of grass, them last 5 cows on most farms are probably being fed on a total silage and meal diet, because from the stocking rate on these higher stocked farms, if they come out, you said there's more grass available to every other cow. There's going to be more winter forage available, and it just takes the risk out of the system, out of the farming system in the current year, when input prices are at an all-time high.
And that's a good point, Adrian, the risk. And like, I would say for some people, when they are getting their bill from the merchant for fertilizer concentrate, you know, it's a lot bigger than it was this time last year, and reducing that risk does take away some personal stress too that farmers will face, you know, notwithstanding the good milk check that is coming in.
And I suppose to add to the point, like, if them 5 cows are sold in the market, there's a very strong trade for stock at the moment, and if there is a cash flow issue on the farm and there's a big bill coming for fertilizer, like that the sale of them 4 or 5 cows will contribute massively to the cash flow and to an impending maybe fertilizer or feed bill that's coming down the road.
And to you, Diarmuid, in terms of winter feed supplies, I read recently on one of the fodder committee meeting reports that, some farmers have fodder from 2021 sitting in the yard. So I'd be interested to know, have you some feedstocks in the yard from 2021? And what is the plan for silage conservation and winter feed for 2022?
We have not changed our plan. I suppose we had the same plan last year and the year before as this year. We've one pit of silage. We've reached the same point we did last year on it. So we have probably a reserve of, 50%. And we plan to replace what we used last winter with what we'll cut in this summer. So we haven't really, we're sticking to the plan, I suppose, in summary.
And on that, Diarmuid, like when you say you're sticking to the plan same as last year, have you gone with the same sort of fertiliser strategy, and will you do the same for second cut?
Yes, in a word. Look, we've tested a slurry this spring, so we're a bit more confident about what's in that. And look, we tried a foliage there on one field there, a foliage spray just to see. So we are experimenting, I suppose, a small bit, looking at other options rather than just artificial fertilizer. So, but that's only a bit of tweaking around the edges. So we have gone out with the same application rates, maybe dial it back a small bit, and maybe because we soil tested last January, so we're aware of the indexes in each plot. So we kind of are tailoring the fertilizer usage depending on the indexes as well.
And I guess there's lots of learnings over the last few years on that, Diarmuid, really using those soil fertility results, and as you say, being smarter with the applications, and I suppose first and foremost using the slurry and then coming in with the chemical fertilizer. Finally, and last word to you, Adrian, what advice can you give us, all of us listening to you today, to ensure that we have sustained feed supply for the rest of the lactation and, through the winter period to get us to next spring?
Look, I think people have to ask themselves maybe one or two questions. First, the people I think that are at, and we mentioned risk already, but the people that are at most risk for securing winter feed are the people that source feed outside of their control, buying silage on the stem. So ask yourself the question, do you purchase winter forage that's outside of your control? If the answer is yes, well, have you established where it's going to come from in 2022? Have you approached the farmer that you usually buy it off of and know it's there for you? Or do you go out on the spot market and just find a field from an auctioneer of silage growing on the stem? I think that's very risky this year, because I think we can see from people coming into the office here for BPS, talking to them, especially farmers in the game of growing silage, that they are exiting that system quickly this year. They're not willing to buy deer fertilizer. They're not willing to spread the fertilizer for silage to grow a crop of silage. So I suppose the key thing is establish, is the silage there where in the same place where you got it last year? And if it's not, then if the answer is no to that, can you reduce your demand now? And we did say like that in effect, that if we can dispose of 5 or 6 cows, that's the equivalent of somewhere in the region of 100 to 125 tonne of silage, and relate that back, that's the equivalent of 12 and a half acres, 13 acres of silage first cut. So if that's the type of game you're in, and buying 12 or 15 or 20 acres of silage on the stem, in effect 5 or 8 cows got sold now in April will cancel each other out. And really, that's the message I would get across to people. And the second one then is that really fertilizing silage shouldn't change this year. We need somewhere in the region of 80 to 90 units made up of between fertilizer and slurry to grow a crop of silage, and not to skimp on fertilizer rates. I totally understand It's a very expensive product this year, but having to go out onto the market to buy silage or to buy feed next autumn is going to be twofold or threefold more expensive to do that. So fertilize the crop correctly. We still have time to top it up if we haven't spread the equivalent of 80 or 90 units at this stage, and ensure that we get good yields in the first cut silage.
I think that's a really good starting point, Adrian. As you say, ask yourself those questions and where is your comfort level if there is risk in uncertainty or about bought in feed. Diarmuid, I think some of the themes that you've highlighted, particularly that decision around retaining those extra cows in the system, and the decision not to do it this year, and how it has impacted on your system has been hugely interesting to hear about. Thank you, Diarmuid, and thank you, Adrian.
Thank you.
That's it for this week's episode of the Dairy Edge podcast, and my thanks to Adrian O'Callaghan and Diarmuid Hegarty for joining me on this week's show. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe to the podcast. You can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify, and for more information go to the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie. I'm Emma-Louise Coffey, and join me next time for your Dairy Edge.